días y bienvenidos. Good morning and welcome once again to Tiempo. I'm Joe Torres. Today we dedicate the whole show to Cuba. I recently had the privilege of traveling to the island along with Eyewitness News photographer Dave Alter. Took some great pictures. We were there to cover New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's historic trip to Cuba, a trade mission trip. The governor and about 20 business and education leaders from New York met with Cuban officials in the communist-run nation. The goal? To build and establish mutual business relationships now that President Obama has eased the trade and travel restrictions between the U.S. and Cuba. A dust-covered street corner in central Havana, Alexander Chacon scratches out a living. We found the 49-year-old laboring under the bright noonday sun, among the wild roosters and playful children, sanding one of the many pieces of battered furniture he has collected. When he's done restoring the old woodwork, he sells it. Money used to feed the 7 people living under his roof. When the Americans lift the embargo, Chacon told us as he took a brief break, or do business with Cuba, good things will arrive. And when good things arrive, our lives will get better. That kind of optimistic viewpoint has given Chacon and many other Cubans something they haven't had in a long time.
Hay esperanza, mucha esperanza.
There's hope, plenty of hope. 100% of Cubans have the hope that the Americans will soften the restrictions and the poor will benefit. But until that happens, expect this scenario to repeat itself day after day after day. Cuban Americans returning to their home country and to their families armed with necessities and luxuries, from food and medicine to televisions and bicycles.
I think it's very important for the people in Cuba that the family support them to Cuba because we can take their some stuff that they need.
Now, here to take a closer look at what the governor's trip means, we have invited our good friend, John Gutierrez, professor from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and Vito Echevarria, columnist for the Cuba Standard publication. Welcome to you both. We'll talk about good people like Alexander Chacon, literally trying to make a living there sanding furniture. But I got to ask you general impressions, and I don't know if you followed closely the governor's trip. What you thought of it, 30 seconds or less?
Well, I thought it was a dog and pony show, right? This was had very little to do with the economic development of New York State. The arguments that Cuba can actually do something for New York, I think, are kind of ridiculous. Cuba's a very poor country. It's not prepared for what New York can offer. And other states in the country, I think, are much more well-positioned to take advantage of increased trade relations between the United States and the island.
Vito, let me get Vito's thoughts. Same question. I mean, initial impressions, governor's trip.
No, I agree 1,000% those viewpoints, especially because, I understand Governor Cuomo is going to be running for re-election at some point, so some people argue that him being out there is more publicity for himself to establish foreign policy credentials than it was to conduct general trade opportunities between Cuba and New York State in particular.
But at the end of the trip, which was only 25 hours, they did announce an agreement in the area of developing, I think, a lung cancer vaccine with Roswell Cancer out in Buffalo and healthcare technology. Isn't that progress?
There's definitely progress. However, some would question how that was done so quickly, because if anybody has experience dealing with Cuba, it takes weeks, if not months, to negotiate a deal, let alone get it signed. So there's a lot of questions as to how Cuomo's people were able to conduct that in a very short period.
So it really didn't happen in one day, is what you...
I don't think so. And even if it did happen in one day, quite frankly, you don't need the governor of New York to go down there and negotiate these deals. There are enough people in New York State who can actually do this work. This really was a political sort of show for the governor.
For what purpose?
You would think to demonstrate some knowledge of American foreign policy or of international relations. In fact, I actually think he did poorly on that count, too. I thought his answers to questions around the extradition of Joanne Chesimard / Assata Shakur, I thought were amateurish. His conversation with these folks, about the glories of American cars in Cuba, sort of obviated the fact that in Cuba, most Cubans are desperately frustrated with these cars because it takes forever to get from one place to the other.
Just to get auto parts.
He looks silly here.
Yes. Well, they're famous for keeping them running with whatever they can. Right? Yes,
exactly.
They have no choice. Go ahead, Vito.
No doubt. I mean, the issue is what whether New York will become a designated port of exit in the foreseeable future, because most of the trade that we can still do, we the United States will still do with Cuba right now, is mostly agriculture and food products. The question is, where does New York State register in terms of that? It's not that we don't produce agricultural products, it's that we're not known for that. We're not, Nebraska, for example, some years ago, the governor of that state, Dave Heinemann, actually made some FaceTime, actually went to Havana to negotiate trade deals resulting in tens of millions of dollars in wheat sales to Cuba.
Is that a reality, New York becoming a port of call? You're shaking your head no.
Well, it may very well be as a port, but I think Vito's point is absolutely well taken, which is that the agricultural products produced in New York are of little interest in Cuba. Right?
Apples,
apples.
Right. This is not what we do well. Maybe 20 years from now, when they're looking for construction financing and expertise in building residential buildings, we'll be able to offer something, but not right now.
Sit tight. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit, not so much about the governor, but about the people of Cuba, because, you know, we were able to focus a little bit on the struggles that they face each and every day. And when we come back on Tiempo, we will take a look at life in Centro Havana, Havana Centro, Central Havana. We'll get input and insight from the people who live there. Fascinating when we come back.